He heard the sound after the last customer was gone, after the grill had gone cold, and the only light left in the harbor came from a row of street lamps that had been flickering for weeks without anyone bothering to fix them. A small sound, metal on plastic, the kind a person makes when they are trying very hard not to be heard. Isaac Monroe had been running Monroe's fireplate for 4 years. He knew every creak in the frame, every rattle the diesel engine made when the temperature dropped, every way the corrugated roof caught the wind off the water. What he heard now was none of those things. It was breath, controlled, shallow, and close. He stood still for a moment in the narrow corridor between the cold storage units and the spice rack Denise had helped him build from salvaged wood the first summer they planned the truck together. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't shout. He took the small flashlight clipped near the propane shutoff, pointed it at the floor so the beam was indirect, and said quietly into the dark back end of his own truck, "Somebody back there?" Nothing. Then, unmistakably, a held breath letting go. If you've ever been the kind of person that a frightened teenager is afraid of, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, because Isaac Monroe was about to find out that he was the only adult in a 17-year-old girl's world who didn't fit that description. The girl was wedged between the ice storage bins and the dry goods shelf, knees drawn up, one silver heel still on her right foot, the other foot bare, and streaked with something dark that might have been harbor mud, or might have been worse. Her dress was formal, the kind worn to events with printed programs and waiters who refill your water glass before you ask. The hem was soaked and torn at the corner. Her mascara had tracked down both cheeks in the way it does when someone has been crying for a long time and stopped. Not because they felt better, but because they ran out. She looked at him the way people look at a door they're not sure they can trust to hold their weight. "Don't call anyone," she said. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who had spent years giving instructions and was now giving them from a position that had no authority left in it whatsoever. Isaac lowered the flashlight further, angling it away from her face entirely. "Are you hurt?" "No." He had seen that particular no before. It came from the same place as the particular way she had pulled her right hand back under the hem of her dress when he first swept the light across the back of the truck. The hand going under the fabric was not a gesture. It was a reflex. "My name's Isaac," he said. "This is my truck. I'm not going to call anyone you don't want me to call. Unless you're having a medical emergency. Are you?" She studied him. He understood what she was calculating. She was trying to determine if an unfamiliar man in a closed vehicle was more dangerous than whatever she had run from. He let her calculate. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance, didn't step toward her, didn't pull out his phone to demonstrate good faith. He just stayed where he was and let her decide at her own pace. "No," she said again, quieter this time. "Okay." He reached past the supply shelf, without looking away from the middle distance between them, found a bottle of water he knew was there, and set it on the floor. He nudged it toward her with the toe of his boot, then straightened back up and gave her 6 more feet of space. She looked at the bottle for a long time. When she finally reached for it, her right sleeve fell back, and Isaac saw the bruise. It wrapped the circumference of her wrist the way a bruise does when a hand has gripped rather than struck. 4 finger-shaped marks on one side, and a broader discoloration from a thumb on the other. The color was deep, already beyond the early yellow-pink stage, sitting in that deep purple-brown range that means the injury was hours old, not minutes. She saw him looking. Her hand snapped back. "It's not what you think." Isaac didn't ask what he thought. He didn't ask who did it. He didn't lean forward or lower his voice into the register of someone performing concern. He just said 3 words. "I believe you." Clara Ellison blinked. She had been prepared for questions. She had been prepared for disbelief, for the transaction of skepticism she would have to overcome before anyone considered that she might be telling the truth. She had not been prepared for those 3 words delivered without condition or negotiation, or the expectation of gratitude. His phone buzzed on the counter above her. Isaac glanced at the screen and answered, "Hey, champ, Dad." a 10-year-old boy's voice, slightly drowsy, doing its best to sound awake. "You said almost done 2 hours ago." "I know. Give me a little more time." "Grandma Marisol went home. She said to tell you she left the chicken in the oven, but it's probably dried out." "Tell her thank you." "I already did." "Did you bring leftovers?" Isaac looked at the space between himself and the girl, with the ruined dress and the bruised wrist. "Not tonight, champ. You gave away the last stuff again, didn't you? Get some sleep. I'll be home soon." A pause on the other end. "Then, Mom used to say that feeding strangers was just how you apologize to the world without saying sorry." Isaac went quiet for just a second. "She was right," he said. "Be careful, Dad." "I will." He ended the call and looked at Clara. Something had shifted in her expression during the conversation. The wariness was still there, but underneath it, very carefully, was something else. The look of a person who has just witnessed a small piece of ordinary life, and been reminded that ordinary life exists. "You have a son," she said, 10 years old. "You should go home to him." "I'll go home to him." "Then you should let me go." Isaac looked at her without speaking for a moment, at the foot with no shoe, at the hem of the dress, at the wrist she was keeping under the fabric. "Where would you go?" he asked. Clara's jaw tightened. She had an answer prepared, and then, looking at him, she didn't. Before she could offer any version of it, a sweep of headlights crossed the front windshield of the truck. Then a second set. Then a third. Isaac turned off the interior light in one practiced motion. Clara went rigid. Not the general tension of someone startled. The specific, recognizing terror of someone who has heard this particular sound before. Tires on gravel. A particular cadence of doors opening. Footsteps with a purpose and a direction. 3 men in dark suits moved across the parking lot below the South Harbor. Their posture was the posture of people who were accustomed to finding what they were looking for. One of them wore a small earpiece. One of them held a phone and was already looking at Isaac's truck. The third one walked directly toward the rear door and stopped 3 feet away. "Mr. Monroe." The voice was conversational. The way the voice of someone who does not believe he will encounter resistance is always conversational. "We're not looking to create any difficulty here. We're just looking for the young lady. Her family's worried about her." Isaac said nothing. "There's an envelope in my hand. $10,000, cash. Nobody needs to know this happened. You go home to your son, the girl comes with us, and everyone goes on with their evening." Clara closed her eyes. $10,000 was real money. Isaac knew exactly what it was in the denominations of his actual life. It was 4 months of the storage unit space he used for overflow supplies. It was the compressor repair on the truck he had been putting off since February. It was a used laptop for Caleb's coding class, and 3 months of the tutoring program the boys' school kept recommending, and enough left over to matter. He thought about Denise. Not the way he usually thought about her. In the quiet accumulations of the ordinary. The scent of her cooking. Caleb's mouth when he laughed. The particular way she folded towels because it was faster. He thought about her, the specific way he had tried not to think about her for 4 years. The night she came home with her upper arm bruised under her cardigan, and the careful story about a cabinet door, and the 3 months after that, during which he had tried to believe the story, and mostly managed to, and then the phone call on a Tuesday in March, telling him there had been an accident on Route 41, and the way the officer's voice had stayed inside the word accident, as if it were a room with no other doors. The man outside said, "Mr. Monroe, you're a father, think about your boy." Something closed in Isaac's chest, quietly and completely, the way a lock closes when the right key turns. He reached up and slid the deadbolt on the rear door. One movement. Clear. "Because I'm a father," he said through the door. "This girl doesn't leave this truck until she says she wants to go." The silence from outside had the quality of a recalculation. Inside the truck, Clara Ellison brought both knees tighter to her chest. She was not crying. She was doing something harder. She was trying to decide whether to believe that what had just happened was real. Isaac Monroe crouched down to her level, his back against the supply shelf, and waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the few things 4 years of grief had taught him, that was actually useful. The harbor sounds came through the truck walls. Water on pilings, distant traffic, the low diesel hum of a boat engine somewhere out in the dark. The three men outside didn't leave, but they also didn't attempt to force the door. That told Isaac something about their orders. They had been sent to collect, not to create a scene that could be photographed. "Clara," he said quietly, "you don't have to tell me everything. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, but I need to know if you're safe enough to wait until morning." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I heard them say your wife's name." Isaac's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. "Tonight?" he asked. "At the gala. Before I ran." She pulled the bottle of water against her chest like something to hold. Preston was talking to the foundation director. He said the Monroe file had been closed for 4 years. He said they'd gotten ahead of it before it got out. She paused. "I didn't know who Monroe was, and then I was running and I saw your truck, the sign, the name, and I just—" She stopped. Isaac was very still. "What was the foundation?" he said. "Ellison," she said. "My father's foundation. My name is Clara Ellison." The South Harbor was quiet except for the rain that had started again, soft and steady against the aluminum roof. Isaac Monroe knew the name Ellison, the way everyone in this city knew the name Ellison. From the hospital wing, from the arts center renovation, from the charity auction photos in the newspaper every December. Grant Ellison. Developer, philanthropist, the man whose photograph appeared next to the word generosity so often that the two had become nearly synonymous. He also knew, from a different, older, less comfortable part of his memory, that Denise had worked for an Ellison property in the 18 months before she died. She had been the event services coordinator at the Harbor Grand, which was an Ellison Group hotel. She had made friends there. She had also, in the final 3 months of her life, started coming home from work with a particular look on her face that Isaac recognized now as the look of someone carrying information they don't know what to do with. He had asked her once. She had said, "I need to be sure before I say anything." He had believed she would tell him when she was sure. He had believed in the ordinary patience of time. He had believed in the way a man believes in the weather, that tomorrow would arrive and things would become clearer. Then she died on Route 41, on a Tuesday in March. And what she had been sure or unsure of died with her, as far as Isaac had ever allowed himself to look. "We're going to call someone," he told Clara. "Not your father's people. A woman I know, a lawyer. She handles cases involving minors. I'm not keeping you here and I'm not sending you out there. I'm getting you someone who can protect you through the right channels." Clara looked at the door. "They'll say I'm unstable. They always say that. They'll say a lot of things," Isaac said. "That's different from them being true." He took his phone out and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in 2 years. Rebecca Sloan picked up on the third ring, and by her voice he could tell she had not been sleeping. "Isaac, I have a situation." "What kind?" "The kind that involves a minor, a bruised wrist, and a name you're going to recognize." A pause. "Tell me," he told her. He kept it clean and factual, the way he had learned from years of watching the wrong kind of story get complicated by too many words. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Don't let her leave the truck. Don't let them in. I'll be there in 20 minutes." He put the phone down. Outside, the 3 SUVs were still parked. The man with the earpiece was on his phone. The man with the envelope had stopped extending it toward the truck door, and was now holding it at his side with the careful patience of someone accustomed to waiting out inconvenience. Isaac looked at Clara. "You want something to eat?" She blinked. "What? Food. I have some rice left, some of the cornbread, nothing warm." She looked at him as if the offer was in a language she hadn't expected to encounter. "Okay," she said finally. He moved around the small space of the truck, with the economy of someone who had cooked professionally for 15 years, pulling the covered containers from the cold storage, setting them on the narrow counter without rattling them, finding a spoon without turning the lights back on. He filled a bowl and set it on the floor between them without comment. She ate slowly at first, then less slowly. "At home," she said between spoonfuls, There's always someone asking what I want, but they never wait for the answer. They decide what I want, and then they ask, so it looks like they asked. Isaac didn't respond to that. He found a second piece of cornbread, wrapped it in a paper napkin, and set it beside the bowl. They sat in the dark and the rain, waiting for Rebecca Sloan, while the men in dark suits waited outside, and somewhere across the city, a 10-year-old boy named Caleb slept on a sofa, with the television going, waiting for his father to come home. Isaac Monroe had spent 15 years cooking professionally before he opened the truck. Event kitchens, hotel banquets, the kind of back-of-house work where the food is good and the name on the evening belongs to someone else. He was the kind of cook who runs a service for 300 people without a single return, and no one ever learns his name because no one thinks to ask. He met Denise at one of those events. She was coordinating front of house for a charity dinner at the Harbor Grand, the Ellison Group's flagship property on the waterfront. She left a note in the kitchen pickup window at the end of the night. Best food I've had at one of these in 4 years. Don't let them change it. She had signed it with her name and her extension. He called the next day. They talked for 40 minutes. 2 weeks later they had dinner at a Vietnamese place on the east side that cost them each $40 and felt like the most generous evening either of them had spent in months. They married, Caleb arrived, and for several years, things were good in the way real things are good. If imperfect but foundational, held together by two people who had chosen each other clearly and continued to mean it. Then something changed at the hotel. Isaac saw it before Denise told him anything, which was not unusual. She was a private person about things she hadn't yet sorted through. She started coming home quieter. Not sad exactly. More like the particular alertness of someone who has noticed something they can't unsee. She started keeping a small notebook in her bag, the spiral-bound kind. She started being more careful about what she said on her work phone. One evening he found her at the kitchen table, with a printed spreadsheet, and a look on her face he had never seen before. The specific expression of a person who has found confirmation of something they had hoped was wrong. "What is it?" he asked. She looked up. She studied him for a moment in the way she had of taking a real measurement of a person before answering. Then she said, "I need to make sure I have everything right before I say anything. I don't want to be the person who makes a claim they can't back up." "Okay," he said. "I'll tell you when I have everything." He had believed her. He had believed she would. He had not known that she had already begun the process of copying and documenting, that the small USB drive she kept in the back of her notebook was already acquiring what it would eventually contain, that she had already spoken to 2 colleagues who had witnessed the same pattern she had documented, that she had already made one cautious, preliminary contact with a lawyer, whose name she had found through a patient advocacy network she trusted. He had not known any of that, because she was protecting him from the point at which the danger became real. She was that kind of person. She died in March of that year on a Tuesday at 6:42 in the morning, on a stretch of Route 41 that had no witnesses and no traffic cameras, in a single car accident that the police report attributed to wet pavement and inattention. The car had gone off the embankment at a bend, through a guardrail that investigators later noted had been reported as compromised the previous November, but not yet repaired. Isaac had read the report 4 times. He had spoken to the investigating officer. He had hired, briefly, a private investigator who found nothing actionable, and then he had stopped because Caleb was 6 years old and needed a father who was present, not one who was consumed by a suspicion he could not prove, and that threatened to eat the years that remained. He packed Denise's work things into a box and put the box in the back of the closet behind his winter coats. He had not opened it since. That box was in his mind when Rebecca Sloan arrived at the harbor 45 minutes after his call, a canvas bag over one shoulder, and the particular expression of someone who has been woken by difficult news before and has learned not to let it delay them. She was young, mid-30s, with the brisk manner of someone who worked primarily in environments that punished hesitation. She had known Denise marginally, through a community legal clinic they had both volunteered at, which was how Isaac had her number. She was now a staff attorney at a children's advocacy organization, whose name appeared on courthouse filings in cases involving exactly the kind of situation Isaac had described on the phone. She assessed the scene quickly. The 3 vehicles still in the lot, the man with the earpiece, the door of the food truck. She knocked twice, identified herself by name, and Isaac opened the door. She looked at Clara. She looked at Clara's wrist. She looked at the bowl and the cornbread wrapper on the floor, and then back at Clara. "My name's Rebecca," she said. "I'm an attorney. You don't have to answer any questions you don't want to answer, but I want to tell you what I can do for you tonight, if you want to hear it." Clara looked at Isaac. He didn't say anything. He didn't encourage her with a look or a nod. He left the decision entirely with her, because the decision was entirely hers. "Okay," Clara said. Within the hour, Rebecca had photographed the bruising, documented the circumstances in a formal statement, and placed a call to the on-call worker at the city's Child Protective Services Division. By 2 in the morning, there was an official placement hold on Clara's custody status, which meant that Grant Ellison's security team had no legal mechanism to remove her anywhere until a formal hearing could be convened. Preston Vale, the man with the envelope, attempted to speak with Rebecca in the parking lot. She handed him her card and told him all future communications should be directed to her in writing. He looked at Isaac. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. Isaac looked at him with the specific steadiness of a man who has already considered and accepted the consequences of every choice he made in the past 3 hours. "Yeah," he said, "I do." The next morning was a Wednesday, and by the time Isaac got home, Caleb was already awake and eating cereal at the kitchen table, with the laptop open to a tutorial about something involving motion sensors. He looked up. "You look like you didn't sleep," Caleb said. "I didn't sleep much. Did something happen?" Isaac sat down across from his son. He looked at the boy's face, Denise's forehead, Isaac's jaw, both their eyes in a combination that still sometimes surprised him. He had been trying to figure out, since 2:30 in the morning when he finally left the harbor, how much to say. "Something happened," he said. "I helped someone who needed help. Someone bad? Someone scared. There's a difference." Caleb considered this with the seriousness he brought to most things. "Is she okay?" Isaac looked at him. "Yeah, she's going to be. Good." Caleb went back to the tutorial. Then, without looking up, Mom would have done the same thing. Isaac put his hands flat on the table and said nothing for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally, "she would have." He had 2 hours before the food truck needed to open. He used one of them sitting in front of Denise's box in the back of the closet. He sat in front of it for a long time before he opened it. Inside, her staff badge from the Harbor Grand, a spiral notebook, a folder of printed emails, a small plastic USB drive taped to the inside cover of the notebook, and a sealed envelope with his name on it in her handwriting. He opened the envelope last. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten in the careful, even she used when she wanted to make sure something was understood correctly. It had been written, from the date at the top, 11 days before she died. She wrote, "Isaac, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to tell you directly, and I'm sorry for that. I need you to know that I tried to do this right. I tried to give them the chance to be honest. They weren't interested." She explained what she had found. The Ellison Foundation's charitable accounts had been used, over a period of at least 6 years, to fund a series of confidential settlements with individuals, mostly young women, mostly employees or event staff, who had come forward with reports of misconduct involving people within the Ellison Group's sphere. The settlements were structured as professional development grants in the Foundation's books. The pattern was systematic. It had involved at least 3 different attorneys, 2 of whom had subsequently left their firms. She had names, amounts, and dates. They were on the USB. She wrote, "I know you're going to want to do something immediately. Please don't do anything before you talk to someone who knows how to protect you legally. They have a lot of resources and they are not above using them in ugly directions. I need you to be careful for Caleb's sake. But I also need you to know that I didn't imagine this. I saw it, I documented it, and it's real. Don't let them tell you I was confused." The last line of the letter read, "Don't teach Caleb that staying safe means looking away. That's not the life I want him to have, and it's not the life you want either." Isaac folded the letter along its original creases. He sat with it for a long time. Then he called Rebecca Sloan. She arrived at his apartment that evening with a colleague from her organization, a forensic accounts specialist named Torres, who wore reading glasses on a chain and said almost nothing for the first hour while he went through the contents of the USB on a laptop he had brought in a padded case. Caleb was at his friend Jordan's house. Marisol from downstairs had been asked to keep him for dinner. Clara was in a licensed emergency placement house across town, safe, assigned a caseworker, and, for the first time in what she had described to Rebecca as a very long time, sleeping without a scheduled wake-up, and without anyone in the next room, listening for the sound of her moving around. Torres worked through the USB documents systematically. The files included the settlement spreadsheet, a folder of emails between Preston Vale and Ellison Group Legal, and a second folder containing something Isaac had not known about. A voice memo, recorded on Denise's work phone, dated 3 weeks before her death. Torres played it through his laptop speakers. Denise's voice filled the small apartment, and Isaac sat at his own kitchen table and listened to his dead wife speak for the first time in 4 years. Her voice was measured and clear, as it always was when she was being deliberate about something. She was not crying. She was stating facts into the phone the way a person states facts. When they understand, they may need a record. She described a conversation she had overheard between Preston Vale and a foundation board member. She described the spreadsheet she had found on a shared drive. She described the pattern she had noticed among the settlement recipients, all women, all young, all employed in service roles at Ellison Properties or events. She described a file name that appeared in the emails, CE Household, Minor. Contain internally, she said. I don't know who CE is, but I know what contain internally means in this context. It means the same thing it meant with all the others. Then she said, Isaac, if you're hearing this and I couldn't tell you directly, I need you to know that what I found is real, and it's documented, and they are going to try very hard to make everyone believe I was confused or emotional, or had some kind of problem. I didn't have a problem. I had evidence. There's a difference, and that difference matters. Her voice paused. Don't let them do to someone else's kid what they've been doing. That's all I'm asking. The recording ended. The apartment was very quiet. Rebecca didn't say anything. Torres closed his laptop. Isaac sat at the table with his hands folded and his eyes on the middle distance for a long time. CE, he said finally. Rebecca nodded. Clara Ellison, 16 years old. Minor household incident. Contain internally. A file that had existed, apparently, since she was young enough to be described only by her initials, because even the people creating the paper trail had understood they needed to be oblique about it. What do we do with this? Isaac asked. Rebecca was already reaching into her bag. We do it right, she said. Which means we do it through the right channels, with proper documentation, with the right people in the room, and we do it in a place where they can't just make it go away again. The Ellison Foundation's annual recognition gala was held on a Saturday evening at the Harbor Grand Ballroom, which was a room Isaac Monroe had cooked for 9 times between the ages of 26 and 31. He knew the loading dock. He knew the kitchen layout. He knew that the fire exit on the east side of the building emptied into the alley where the caterers parked, and that the ballroom's acoustic system had a patch panel in the room just off the main stage that a competent person could access without being noticed. He had not offered any of this information. It was Rebecca who had worked out the approach with Clara over 3 days of careful, documented preparation, the formal complaint filed with the state's Family Services Division, the protective order reviewed by a family court judge, the careful coordination with 2 investigative reporters from different outlets who had been given time to review the USB contents, and verify the documents against public records. The gala was the venue because it was the only place Grant Ellison would be in a room full of people he needed to impress, with cameras running, with no mechanism to control what happened next if someone stood up and spoke before he could stop them. Isaac drove Clara and Rebecca to the hotel in his truck. He parked in the caterer's lot and walked them to the east exit, where a woman Isaac didn't recognize let them in with a key card she had been provided. Through a chain of arrangements Isaac had not been fully briefed on and did not ask about, Grant Ellison was already on stage when they arrived in the wings. He was a tall man with the particular ease of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this one. He wore a dark suit and spoke without notes, which was either confidence or familiarity, and in his case was probably both. He spoke about family. He spoke about the responsibility that came with resources. He spoke about the Ellison Foundation's new initiative to support at-risk youth. In the wings, Clara stood very still. She was wearing a gray sweater and dark pants. Her own clothes, chosen by her own hand, not a dress selected for an occasion or a silhouette approved by someone else's calendar. Her hair was pulled back simply. She looked like herself rather than like a public version of herself, and the difference was perceptible to anyone paying close attention. Preston Vale materialized from somewhere to Isaac's left. He did not raise his voice. That was, Isaac had come to understand, the particular skill of men like Preston Vale, the management of threat as a temperature rather than a volume. He spoke just above a whisper. "You're about to destroy this girl's life," he said to Isaac. "Whatever you think you're doing, you don't understand what it's going to cost her." Isaac looked at him. "You're calling it her life," he said, "but you've been deciding what she does inside it, since she was young enough that her file only used her initials." Preston's expression did not change in any dramatic way. It changed the way a lock changes when the wrong key is inserted. A very small, very final resistance. "Last chance," Preston said. "You've been saying that to people for a long time," Isaac said. "It stopped being a last chance the night you sent 3 cars to a parking lot and tried to buy a scared teenager with a $10,000 envelope." He turned away from Preston and looked at Clara. She was watching her father on stage. Her hands were at her sides. She was breathing deliberately, the way a person breathes when they have decided something and are working through the final calculation of it. "You don't have to be brave," Isaac said quietly. "You just have to be honest. Brave is extra." Clara looked at him. "What if they don't believe me? Rebecca has the documents on a screen in this building right now. What you say, they'll have to account for." He paused. "And I'll be here when you come off that stage." She turned back to the stage. Grant Ellison was finishing his remarks. The audience was beginning to prepare their applause. A foundation staff member with a clipboard was positioning himself near the stage steps to direct what was supposed to happen next. Clara walked out before the clipboard could direct her anywhere. The applause that began when the audience saw her was the reflexive applause of people who believed they were about to witness a scripted family moment. Grant Ellison turned, and his smile was the practiced smile of a man who believed he was still inside a controlled situation. Clara took the microphone from the stand. She stood in the light for a moment and said nothing. The room was still applauding, slowly trailing off as people began to sense that something was off about the composition of the moment. "My father said I've been having a difficult time emotionally," she said. The applause stopped. "He's not wrong. I have been having a difficult time." Her voice was steady in the way a voice is steady when it has gotten past fear into the simpler territory of fact. But being upset isn't the same as being wrong about what upset you. She extended her right arm and pushed the sleeve of her sweater above the wrist. She did not dramatize it. She did not hold the wrist up for the cameras or turn it or say anything for a long moment. She let people see it and draw their own conclusions, which is what the truth generally allows people to do. "This happened the night I tried to leave this building 3 weeks ago," she said. "Preston Vale grabbed my arm in the hallway to stop me from going outside where the press was. My father was 10 feet away." She looked, briefly, at her father. He told Preston to bring me upstairs. He didn't ask if I was all right. He asked if anyone had seen. The room was the kind of quiet that happens in large spaces when everyone in them stops breathing at the same time. On a screen at the back of the room, which Rebecca had arranged to be connected to the presentation system, text began to appear. Emails, records, dates, names, settlement amounts, payment codes, a file name, Monroe D. Event staff, contain. Grant Ellison stepped forward on the stage. "This is, Clara, this isn't the place to." "I know," Clara said. "That's why I chose it. Because you've been deciding what the right place is for a very long time. And every place you chose was somewhere I wasn't allowed to say anything." A woman in the third row of the audience had her phone out. The reporters in the back of the room, 2 of them, positioned separately, who had been there since before the event started, were already recording. A former events coordinator who had worked at the Harbor Grand for 6 years, and who had agreed 3 days prior to provide a formal statement, stood at the edge of the room beside Rebecca Sloan. Her name was Teresa. She had been one of Denise Monroe's colleagues, present at a meeting 4.5 years ago, at which settlement terms had been discussed. She had been instructed in writing not to discuss the matter further, as a condition of continued employment. She had kept the instruction letter. She had given it to Rebecca. Grant Ellison attempted, twice more, to redirect. He used words like stability, family, appropriate support, proper channels. Each time Clara waited for him to finish. "Proper channels," she said, finally. Denise Monroe tried proper channels. She reported what she found. They paid people to forget. They called her unstable. They said she had an agenda. 3 weeks after that, she died on a wet road on a Tuesday morning. And no one asked very many questions because Grant Ellison had donated $3 million to the police foundation that year. She paused. "I'm not saying anything I can't document. The documentation is on the screen behind you." Grant Ellison said nothing more, not because he had nothing to say, because 2 things were happening at once. The foundation's legal counsel was now moving through the crowd toward the stage, and the foundation's board chairman, who had been seated in the second row, was standing, and neither of them was moving toward Grant. They were moving toward each other, in the manner of people who understand that they are now operating in damage containment territory, rather than the evening's planned narrative. Preston Vale attempted to leave through the east side exit and found that the door required a key card to open from the inside, and that the key card belonging to the staff member who usually managed that door was no longer on that staff member's person. Isaac Monroe stood in the wings and watched Clara walk back off the stage. She came to where he was standing and stopped. She was holding the microphone at her side. Her sleeve was still pushed up. She looked like someone who had just climbed something very steep and was not yet sure what the view was worth, but was glad to be standing at the top. "They're going to say a lot of things," she said. "Yeah," Isaac said. "Some people will believe them. Some people always do. That's different from the truth, though." He held out his hand, not in the way an adult holds out a hand to a child, in the way one person offers a handshake to another when the harder part of something is over. "You did good." Clara looked at the hand for a moment, then she shook it. Behind her, in the ballroom, the evening had dissolved into the organized chaos of what happens when a controlled narrative loses control. People on phones, lawyers convening in corners, the foundation staff uncertain whether to begin cleanup or wait for instruction that was not coming. Caleb Monroe, 10 years old, watched the end of the broadcast on a tablet at Marisol's kitchen table. When the screen cut to the exterior of the Harbor Grand, he looked up at Marisol. "Did he know it was going to go like that?" Caleb asked. Marisol considered this seriously, the only way she ever considered anything. "Your father doesn't always know how things are going to go," she said. "But he knows what's right when he sees it. That's usually enough." Caleb turned back to the tablet. "Mom would have liked her," he said. "Clara." Marisol put her hand briefly on the back of the boy's head and went to make him a sandwich. The formal proceedings that followed took months. The Child Protective Services investigation opened within days. A family court judge extended Clara's protective order. Preston Vale was suspended. The state attorney general's office opened an inquiry into the Ellison Foundation's financial records. And as Rebecca submitted the USB contents through proper channels, the scope expanded. The case involving Denise Monroe's accident was formally re-examined. The guardrail report, the route, the timing, the pattern of settlements, all of it now part of a picture that enough people were looking at simultaneously that it could not simply be made to go away. Isaac reopened Monroe's fireplate the Wednesday after the gala. The morning regulars, construction crews, the overnight nurses, the older man who came every weekday for a chicken rice bowl and never gave his name, none of them deserved to find a closed window because Isaac's life had gotten complicated. 6 weeks after the gala, on a Tuesday morning, Clara came to the truck. She was wearing a green hoodie and her hair was in a simple ponytail. She was with her caseworker, a quiet woman named Patricia, who waited by the street while Clara walked up to the window. She did not bring anything. She stood at the window for a moment, before she said anything, looking at the sign, the big painted letters Caleb had insisted on adding above the menu board, the ones Isaac had tried to talk him out of, and then given up on because the boy had a very definite vision. Monroe's fireplate, good food, honest heat, and below that, newly added in a different hand, slightly smaller, safe place. Caleb had painted those 2 words himself on a Sunday afternoon, with the small brush he used for his model kits, and Isaac had looked at them for a long time before deciding to leave them. "I wanted to bring something," Clara said, "but I didn't know what." She paused. "The water, that night. I kept thinking about it, how you just put it there and didn't make me ask." Isaac leaned on the counter. "You want something now?" "Cornbread," she said. "If you have it, I have it." He wrapped a piece and passed it through the window. She held it in both hands. She looked at him over the counter with the particular directness of someone who has been practicing what they want to say. "You didn't save me by speaking for me," she said. "You saved me by making sure no one could stop me from speaking." Isaac didn't correct her or deflect or perform humility. He just nodded, because that was what had happened, and acknowledging the truth of a thing was different from taking credit for it. "Denise would have known exactly what to do with you," he said. Clara looked at him steadily. "Tell me something about her." He thought for a moment. "She used to say that feeding people was the most honest thing you could do. Because you can lie with a compliment and lie with a gift and lie with a kind word. But if you make someone a good meal, there's no lie in it. Either they feel better or they don't." Clara held the cornbread in both hands and looked down at it for a moment. "She sounds like someone worth being angry for," she said quietly. "She was," Isaac said. "She was exactly that." That evening, he locked the truck at 11. Caleb was sitting in the back booth they used on nights when his grandmother couldn't watch him, doing homework on the new laptop, earbuds in. The South Harbor was quiet. The broken street lamp had finally been repaired, and the light it cast was steady and clean. Isaac wiped down the grill, and put the covers on the prep stations, and turned off the gas and did all the small, familiar things he did at the end of every day. He looked at the words his son had painted on the board. Safe place. He had been turning that over since Caleb painted them. The boy had not explained himself or asked permission or announced the addition. He had simply looked at the truck one afternoon and decided it needed one more true thing said about it. Isaac thought about Denise's letter. "Don't teach Caleb that staying safe means looking away. That's not the life I want him to have." He thought about Clara at the top of those stage steps, sleeve pushed up, steady, not waiting for anyone to hand her permission. He thought about the woman Teresa, who had kept a letter for 4 years in a file folder in a box in her hall closet, because she had never been quite able to make herself throw it away, because something in her had believed that a day might come when the keeping of it would matter. And it had. He thought about the ordinary stubbornness of people who hold on to true things. He closed up the truck and knocked on the back booth. Caleb pulled out one earbud and looked up. "Ready?" Isaac said almost. Caleb closed the laptop. "Dad, do you think she's going to be okay, Clara?" Isaac picked up the keys. Yeah, he said. I think she's going to figure out how to be. That's not the same as okay. No, Isaac said. It's harder, but it lasts longer. Caleb put the laptop in his bag, stood, and slung the bag over his shoulder with the practiced ease of a 10-year-old who had been carrying his own things for a while. He looked at the sign on the window as they passed it. Do you think Mom sees the new words? He asked. Isaac pushed the door open. The harbor air was cool and smelled of salt water and distance. I think she's the reason I didn't cover them up, he said. Caleb walked out into the night ahead of him, and Isaac followed, and the truck sat in the lit harbor behind them, with its sign facing the street, saying the same things it had always said and meaning them more now. The way a true thing means more, the longer it manages to stay true. Isaac Monroe did not have money to fight Grant Ellison in the currency Grant Ellison understood. He had no law firm on retainer, no security team, no communications director to manage the story after it broke. What he had was a food truck, a 10-year-old son who noticed when the right words were missing and painted them in himself, the memory of a woman who had tried to do the right thing and had not deserved what it cost her, and enough stubborn knowledge of his own conscience to understand that, on the night, a frightened girl pressed herself into the back corner of his truck. The only question that mattered was not what it would cost him to stay. The question was what it would cost her if he didn't. Some people spend their whole lives measuring the price of doing right. Most of the time, they measure it against the wrong things. Isaac Monroe had learned, slowly, at great personal cost, through the specific education of grief, that the only honest ledger is the one that accounts for what happens to the people standing when you decide not to look. He had looked, and in the looking, he had finally done what Denise always knew he was capable of. He had refused to be one more adult who saw the bruise and helped with the story.